I grew up in a family with three very strong women. My two sisters, Ronelle and Penny, and my mother, Cecilia. Today's episode I dedicate to them. Good day and welcome to another episode of Cult Life. Hi, and welcome to another episode with me, your host, Robin Jackson. This is Cult Life, coming to you all the way from South Africa. Glad you could join me. I want you to stay tuned to the end of the show. I've got a very interesting announcement with regards to next week's episode. A very interesting guest on the show. So please stay tuned to the end of the show and you'll hear more about that. Today's episode is all about the subjection of women and how Jehovah's Witnesses and other cults actually view women within their ranks. The month of August in South Africa is celebrated as Women's Month. We have an official holiday on the 9th of August each year, which is National Women's Day, to commemorate the 1956 march of approximately 20,000 women to the Union buildings in Pretoria, which is now called Swane, to petition against the country's past laws that required South Africans defined as black at the time under the Population Registration Act to carry an internal passport known as a pass that served to actually maintain population segregation or control the urbanization, and to manage migrant labor during the apartheid era. The first National Women's Day was celebrated on 9th of August 1994, and in 2006, a reenactment of the march was staged for its 50th anniversary, with many of the 1956 march veterans in attendance. In a broader perspective, it also draws attention to significant issues South African women still face, such as parenting, domestic violence, sexual harassment in the workplace, unequal pay, and schooling for all girls. And I guess this is an issue that affects women worldwide in many countries. So it aims to highlight the subjection that women still face in today's society. Religions and cults have very often been in the forefront of the subjection and suppression of women. The Watchtower Society, commonly referred to as Jehovah's Witnesses, exerts a great deal of control over everyday life of its members. Women in particular suffer from psychological stresses in this high control environment, and it is also a culture where patriarchal attitudes limit women's personal power and predominate in their relationships with men. I have witnessed, this type of subjection firsthand, and it was an issue that bothered me as many of the Watchtower articles openly advocated the subjection, repression of women within their ranks. Now, women in Watchtower society occupy a position of decreased personal power relative to men in the group. Women are commonly exhorted to remain in submission to their husbands and are banned from instructing baptized male members about spiritual matters and from addressing the congregation from the pulpit. A woman is regarded as a weaker vessel who should manage her household under her husband's approval and direction, owing to her duty of submission to her husband. And this is what stated in Watchtower publications. The seminal Watchtower Society text, goes on to define a woman's role as caring for the family, prepare nutritious meals, keep the home clean and neat, and share in instructing their children, subjecting themselves to their own husband. So It's a very subjective view that the Watchtower takes. In addition to a relative lack of power compared to their male companions in the congregations and in relationships with their husbands in the home, women as well as men must cope with a community that discourages independent thinking. It mistrusts higher education, controls access to information, of course, any information that's critical of the group, restricts its members from expressing doubts, discourages diversity, and severely punishes nonconformists. Watchtower articles often praise women for staying with husbands despite violent abuse, and witnesses are encouraged to stay with violent husbands except in extreme life-threatening situations. And I want to I'll bring your attention to an excerpt from the Watchtower, and here's an example of that. The Watchtower of February the 5th, 2012, on page 29, relates a experience there, and I quote from that Watchtower. It says, Selma recalls a lesson she learned from the witness who studied with her. On one particular day, says Selma, I didn't want to have a Bible study. The night before, Steve had hit me, and as I had tried to prove a point, and I was feeling sad and sorry for myself. After I told the sister that what happened and how I felt, she asked me to read 1 Corinthians 13 verses 4 to 7. As I did, I began to reason. Steve never does any of those loving things to me. But the sister made me think differently by asking, how many of those acts of love do you show toward your husband? My answer was, none, for he is so difficult to live with. The sister softly said, Selma, who is trying to be a Christian here? You or Steve? Realizing that I needed to adjust my thinking, I prayed to Jehovah to help me be more loving toward Steve. Slowly things started to change. After 17 years, Steve accepted the truth. So the Watchtower, in effect, actually blames the wife for the husband's behavior and physical abuse. Now, this narrative is a constant feature within articles and within everyday communication amongst the witnesses. This condescending outlook has also been punted from the platform by Watchtower officials themselves. The following is a recording, and it's an excerpt of a recording from a public talk by Samuel Hurd, who is now a governing body member. And he makes the following comments about women, how they need to be in subjection to men. And this talk was based on a 1967 awake. And I quote from this talk, and this is what he said from the platform. He says, scientists say that the cranial capacity of a woman is 10% smaller than that of a man. So now this shows that she's just not equipped for the role of headship. Her role is one of subjection to the man. Her role is that of submissiveness, and that means she should recognize that she is a woman and be glad to be a woman. Never want to be what you are not equipped to be. Sometimes we hear her say, oh, if I were a man, I'd do this and I'd do that, as if to be wishing to be something that she is not designed to be. Do you know what that borders on? That borders on homosexuality. And do you know what the devil is doing nowadays? He's taking women who want to be men and makes men out of them. So this is an extract from a talk given by Samuel Hurd on the platform way back in 1971. But wait, the absurd views does not stop there. The Watchtower of November the 15th, 2009, on page 12 and 13, actually says this, and this is a question from readers, and I quote, it says, The question is it appropriate for a sister to wear a head covering when interpreting Bible discourses into sign language at Christian meetings, assemblies, or conventions? And this is what the Watchtower answers. It says, generally speaking, a Christian woman ought to wear a head covering when she cares for matters that are normally the responsibility of her husband or a brother in the congregation. This is in harmony with the principle stated by the Apostle Paul that every woman that prays or prophesies with her head uncovered shames her head, because the head of the woman is the man. When a sister wears a modest and appropriate head covering in such situations, it is a sign of submission to the theocratic arrangement in the Christian congregation. Now, listen to this. What though of situations in which a sister interprets into sign language for a brother who is delivering a discourse? True, the sister is merely acting as a linguistic intermediary. That is to say, the teaching is not her own, but that of the brother for whom she is interpreting. However, sign language interpretation is very different from interpretation between spoken languages. With spoken languages, the audience can focus on the speaker and still listen to the interpreter. Also, unlike sign language interpretation, sisters who interpret spoken languages are usually not situated so prominently. At times, they may even have an option of being seated while interpreting, or, if they are standing, of facing the speaker rather than the audience. So it would be necessary for a sister interpreting into a spoken language to wear a head covering. In addition to this, because of developments in the technology used when talks are interpreted into sign language, the interpreter's role may become even more magnified. An image of the sister's interpretation is commonly featured on a large screen, while the speaker himself may not even be visible to the audience. With these factors in mind, it would thus seem appropriate for the sister who interprets into a sign language to acknowledge her secondary role as an interpreter by wearing a head covering. So, if you are a woman sign language interpreter, and just because the screen that you are projected on for the deaf to see you better is bigger than the male speaker, you have to wear a head covering. Think about that. The subjection just keeps on going in the Watchtower organization. It's just absurd. However, Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only cult or high control group that has a very subjected view and treats women with disdain. And here I think of Warren Jeffs of the FLDS, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Church of the Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, who was notorious for their polygamous practices and subservience of women. And this is some of the teachings from the FLDS and Warren Jeffs himself. They view women as their role or their purpose is to have children. They belong to the prophet, of course, which is Warren Jeffs himself. You must live plural marriage. You must obey your husband. You must please your husband. Do not tell the husband what to do. Do your housework. Do not have girlfriends. Teach your children. Teach your children to do what the father wants. Avoid socializing. And so it just goes on. FLDS women are told over and over again to, in inverted commas, to keep sweet. So to them this means they should swallow their pride, swallow emotions, suffer silently regardless of what concerns they may have. Not to show any emotion, don't rock the boat, don't make any trouble, don't ask any questions, do not criticize, don't find fault. Girls should accept the polygamous lifestyle and the men's wishes without complaint. Don't flinch when you're told to do something that doesn't quite feel right. Just be nice, don't complain, because complaining disturbs the Spirit of God. So that's the FLDS. Then there's the fundamentalist Christian community known as the Quiverful movement. And women in this world were treated much like those in The Handmaid's Tale. If you haven't had a chance to look at the series The Handmaid's Tale on Netflix, I suggest you do. It's a very, very interesting series. And most of the people, or the women in the Quiverful movement, don't have their own bank accounts, don't have their own email addresses, and couldn't leave the home without permission from their husbands. They're called helpmeets, a word taken from the King James Version of the Bible, which refers to wives as created to meet the needs of their husbands and be helpers to them. So many of these cults' views and practices are taken from a very patriarchal biblical interpretation. And this is what has caused a lot of abuse, be it sexual, physical, and emotional, within these groups, because women are seen as second-class citizens and members with restrictive human rights. The issue of women and child sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses is, of course, now very widely publicized. We see the reports of child abuse on a daily basis coming through, and how organizations and governments are investigating these abuse allegations around the world. There's also the latest Nexium cult in Hollywood, where its leader has been blackmailing female followers into becoming sex slaves, branded with the leader's initials. Looking back at the Branch Davidian cult with David Koresh, the young girls, as young as 11, were given a plastic Star of David, signifying that they had the light and were ready to have sex with the cult leader, of course, David Koresh himself. And he alone was to procreate with the woman in the cult. So the Watchtower Society and many other groups still maintains the 19th century attitudes towards women. Women are told to maintain a state of wifely subjection to their husbands. They are not allowed to address the congregation directly as a man does, and may not instruct, be it religiously from the platform, or instruct a baptized male member of the congregation. All the leaders, from the governing body which runs the worldwide organization down to the elders and ministerial servants of their local congregation, are male. Clearly, women are relegated to a position of less power than their male counterparts. Women are instructed to defer to men both in their personal marital relationships and in the social and religious life of the congregation. And what happens is, as repressed issues fester, these wounds that have closed but never healed, very often dangerous psychological and behavioral symptoms can appear. And these symptoms can often include substance abuse, eating disorders, sexual acting out, obsessions, phobias, personality disorders, depression, and of course suicide. But not all groups exert this level of control on their members. In many groups, both religious and otherwise, guidelines for living and doctrinal wisdom are provided, yet individuals may retain, some sort of control over their own lives on many levels. But in a high control group, like the Witnesses and the FLDS church, the individual relinquishes her control to the group's dogma. Individuals are seen as incapable of directing their own lives and are in constant need of direction and structure from those who are more capable and wise, or are more in touch with God's will, so to speak. And I want to leave you with this little gem from the Watchtower. It's a question from readers, but this is from a very old watchtower. And the question is, will husband and wife live together after the resurrection is completed, if both are in harmony with God? And the answer: the scriptures do not reveal what the relationship of men and women will be after the resurrection is completed. The most that we know is that there will be no children born during the last 100 years of the millennium, nor any born after that, because men and women do not have children after they reach the age of 100 years. Whether the identity of the sexes as such will be preserved, we do not know. There have been some well-authenticated instances in which women have been transformed into men, and it is possible that this transformation may become general, and we shall all be brothers together. What? Oh, that passage, that just cracks me up. So yes, in the capital T truth is stranger than fiction. So thanks for joining me this week. Next week, as I said, we have a very interesting guest joining me on the show. I have Ryan Hogarth, who was the former spokesperson of Scientology South Africa, will be my guest. So look out for that. Remember to follow me on Twitter at RobinJackson70, and give the show a like or a thumbs up or a review on iTunes, YouTube, or Stitcher, or wherever you're listening on any other platforms. Just give it a thumbs up and give us a like. Until next week, goodbye for now.